How does a queen who redefined a nation's faith and captured a king's heart find herself walking toward a scaffold built within her own fortress? The Tower of London was not a royal residence, but a final stage. Anne Boleyn prepared to meet her end. This was not a typical execution. It was a chillingly personal and political spectacle. The king, her husband, had not ordered the clumsy acts of the common executioner. Instead, he had summoned a master swordsman from Calais, a final, grim courtesy to the woman he once moved heaven and earth to possess. Her crime? A collection of accusations: adultery, incest, treason, that materialized with breathtaking speed, just as the king's eye turned to his next wife. This is the story of those final, haunting moments. A queen's last walk, her unshakable dignity in the face of an orchestrated downfall, and the calculated act that would forever stain the Tudor legacy. What were her final thoughts as she looked upon the crowd, her B pendant resting against her heart for the last time? The dawn of May 19, 1536, broke with a cold, indifferent gray. Inside her lodgings in the Tower of London, Anne Boleyn was awake. Her final sunrise cast long, skeletal shadows through the high, barred window. There was no desperate plea, no final frantic appeal. The night had been spent in prayer and quiet contemplation with her almoner, John Skip, preparing her soul. She had taken her final Holy Communion, declaring her innocence on the salvation of her soul, a final, defiant act of faith before God, if not before her king. Her husband Henry was miles away at a hunting lodge, celebrating his impending freedom to marry Jane Seymour. The air in the chamber was thick with cold stone and damp wood, a stark contrast to the perfumed court she once commanded. In the pre-dawn stillness, every sound was magnified. The clang of a gate, a guard's shuffle, the cry of a raven from the battlements. These were the last sounds of her world. She selected her attire with care, a gown of gray damask, trimmed with ermine, and her trademark French hood. This was not the dress of a penitent sinner, but the regal costume of a Queen of England, a calculated message to all who would watch. Her composure was her last weapon, her dignity the final testament to a life lived on the knife's edge of power. The constable of the Tower, Sir William Kingston, arrived to escort her. He found not a weeping wreck, but a woman of unnerving calm. She even joked with him, remarking she had heard the executioner was very good, and that she had a little neck. This chilling gallows humor was another layer of her armor, a defiance against the terror orchestrated by Thomas Cromwell and the king. The sun climbed higher, a reluctant witness, revealing not a condemned woman, but a queen preparing for her final public appearance. Her reign was over, but her story was about to be sealed in legend. Outside, a specialist swordsman from St. Omer near Calais checked the balance of his heavy, two-handed executioner's sword, a weapon chosen for efficiency, a final, cold courtesy from the king who once adored her. For her final appearance, Anne chose her attire with the precision she once used to captivate a king. The morning of May 19, 1536, dawned cold and gray. A delayed execution had granted a few more hours of life, a cruel gift from a nervous king. This was not the dress of a penitent sinner, but the raiment of a queen. Rejecting traditional white, she selected a gown of dark gray damask, a somber yet stately choice. Its pattern caught the weak light, a shadow of the vibrant colors she once favored. Over this, she wore a mantle of ermine, the fur of royalty, a powerful declaration of the status she refused to relinquish, a defiant echo of her coronation. Her ladies-in-waiting moved in a haze of sadness, their hands trembling as they fastened the lacings. They helped place the English-style gable hood over her dark hair, framing her pale, composed face. Their tears were a stark contrast to her own unnerving calm. The final touch was her iconic pearl necklace with its golden bee pendant. It was the emblem of a dynasty she fought to create. Fastening it one last time, she was reclaiming her narrative, asserting her identity against oblivion. Each piece of clothing was a deliberate choice, armor for her final battle. Ready, she stood before a silver mirror. The reflection was not a broken woman, but the architect of a reformation, mother to the future Queen Elizabeth, and a queen consort, a testament to her unyielding spirit. She was dressing for her own history. The Constable of the Tower, Sir William Kingston, waited outside, visibly burdened by his duty. He had reported to Thomas Cromwell that the Queen seemed to have much joy and pleasure in death. As the heavy oak door creaked open, he saw not a condemned traitor, but the woman who had changed England forever, her chin held high. She was ready for the walk across Tower Green, where a swordsman from Calais awaited, his blade promising a quicker end than the common axe. Every footstep would be a performance, her final act of defiance. The heavy bolt on her chamber door slid back with a jarring finality. Sir William Kingston, the Constable of the Tower, stood in the doorway, his face a grim, unreadable mask. He bowed, a gesture of respect that seemed almost cruel in its formality. "Madam," he said, his voice low, "the time has come." Anne met his gaze without flinching, gave a slight nod, and stepped out of her rooms for the last time. Her ladies, weeping softly, followed. The walk began. It was not a long procession, but each step was heavy with history. Flanked by guards, she moved through the cold, echoing corridors of the tower, wearing a gown of gray damask, her iconic pearl bay pendant a defiant gleam against her throat. Her ermine mantle trailed on the rough-hewn stones. The sound was a soft, rhythmic shush, a counterpoint to the clank of armor. She emerged from the darkness of a stone archway into the pale, watery light of the morning. The morning of Friday, May 19th, 1536. Before her lay Tower Green, an unnervingly ordinary patch of grass that had been transformed into a theater of state power. A new, black-draped scaffold dominated the space. Upon it stood the swordsman from Calais, his weapon concealed, a specialist in death brought as a final, twisted act of Henry's mercy. The air was cool and still, carrying the scent of damp earth and the collective held breath of the 1,000 onlookers who had been granted admission. Courtiers and foreign ambassadors watched, their faces a mixture of morbid fascination and political calculation. She did not stumble. Her pace was measured, her head held high. This was not the hurried shuffle of a condemned criminal, but the stately procession of a monarch. A faint, enigmatic smile touched her lips. She was not merely a woman convicted of treason. She was Anne Regina, and she would ensure the eyewitness reports sent across Europe would record her undiminished courage. She was performing her last royal duty, demonstrating to the world not how a traitor meets her end, but how a queen faces her destiny. The crowd on Tower Green was not a baying mob, but a curated audience of the kingdom's elite. On the cold, gray morning of May 19th, 1536, their presence was a command performance. Among them stood the men who had architected her downfall and those who would profit from it. Thomas Cromwell, the king's chief minister, watched with an inscrutable expression, his own fate now inextricably linked to the success of this grim spectacle. Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk, the king's own brother-in-law and Anne's bitter enemy, was there to witness his victory. Henry Fitzroy, the king's illegitimate son, was also present, a living reminder of the Tudor dynasty's desperate need for a male heir, a need Anne had failed to fulfill. As she walked, a hush fell over them. She emerged not as a condemned traitor, but every inch the queen, dressed in a gown of dark gray damask, an ermine mantle on her shoulders. Her famous bee pendant rested against her skin, a final, defiant symbol of her identity. Their whispers ceased, replaced by an awed, fearful silence. They saw not the sorceress and adulteress of the charges, but the queen they had once bowed to, moving with an unnerving grace. Her composure was an indictment. It challenged the narrative they had so carefully constructed. Near the black-draped block stood the executioner, a master swordsman summoned from Calais, his heavy blade a chilling instrument of statecraft, a final, cruel courtesy from the king she had failed to placate. For the courtiers, this was a chilling lesson in the transient nature of power. The favor of the king, which had raised Anne to unprecedented heights, had just as swiftly brought her to this wooden stage. As they watched her, they must have wondered who might be next. Every averted gaze was a calculation of survival. Her dignified procession was a mirror, reflecting their own complicity and their own precarious positions in the treacherous world of the Tudor court, where the glint of a crown could be swiftly replaced by the glint of a sword. The damp chill of the morning, on May 19th, 1536, did little to cool the feverish tension within the tower walls. She reached the foot of the scaffold, a new structure of raw pine smelling of finality. Low to the ground, an intimate stage for a very public act. Atop it stood the expert swordsman brought from Calais. His tool was not the clumsy axe of an English headsman, but a fine, heavy sword, a specialist instrument afforded to her as a final, small mercy from the king. Anne ascended the few steps without assistance. From this small elevation, she looked out over the sea of faces, her judges and her jury. The Tudor rose, an emblem she had once worn with pride, was now a symbol of the dynasty that had consumed her. She began to speak, her voice clear and steady, carrying across the silent green. It was not a confession, but the carefully crafted speech of a masterful politician. Urging the people to pray for him, a final act of loyalty that secured the future of her beloved daughter, Elizabeth. She then removed her ermine mantle and gable hood, handing them to her weeping ladies. For a brief, heartbreaking moment, her fingers brushed against the iconic bepearl pendant at her throat, a final, defiant assertion of the name they had tried to erase. With her hair tucked away, she knelt, her posture still regal, blindfolded with a simple linen cloth. She spoke her final prayer, "To Jesus Christ I commend my soul." The swordsman distracted her with a call, "Bring me the sword." And in the single, fleeting moment she turned her head toward the sound, the blow came. It was a swift, shimmering arc of Valenciennes steel. In that instant, the falcon of the Boleyn crest was grounded, and the story of the queen with the dark eyes was sealed in blood and legend, a cautionary tale whispered through the corridors of power for centuries to come. The air on Tower Green was unnaturally still on the morning of May 19, 1536, the usual London clamor silenced by the gravity of the occasion. As Anne Boleyn emerged from the Queen's house, she moved not with the hesitation of the condemned, but with the measured composure of a monarch attending a solemn state affair. The crowd, a tense and silent sea of Londoners and courtiers packed within the tower walls, watched in hushed reverence, their faces a mixture of pity, curiosity, and fear. They had come expecting a spectacle of disgrace, but Anne offered them a final, powerful lesson in dignity. Dressed in a dark gray damask gown lined with ermine, its regal richness a stark contrast to the grim purpose of the day, she was every inch the queen. Her iconic B necklace rested against her skin, a final, defiant statement of the identity for which she was about to forfeit her life. Her ladies in waiting followed, their eyes fixed on their mistress. Upon reaching the scaffold, Anne ascended the few steps without assistance. She turned not to plead or rage, but to address the assembly with a calm, clear voice that carried across the unnerving silence. She spoke not of her innocence, a dangerous and futile claim in the face of the king's absolute power, but of her devotion to the law and her purported goodwill toward Henry. "I pray God save the king and send him long to reign over you," she declared, each word a carefully chosen shield for her family, and most importantly, for her daughter Elizabeth. It was a performance of extraordinary grace under unimaginable pressure, a final act of agency from a woman who had been stripped of everything but her indomitable spirit. Her speech, full of conventional piety, was a masterful stroke, ensuring she would be remembered not as the venomous traitor of Tudor propaganda, but as a noble and Christian queen meeting her end with courage and poise. As Anne concluded her speech, a figure separated himself from the periphery. He was not the common English headsman with his brutal familiar axe. This was Jean Remorse, a specialist summoned from Calais, a territory then held by England. His presence was a concession from the king, a final, twisted act of mercy. A sword, in the French style, was considered a more noble and swifter instrument than the axe, which often required more than one attempt. The weapon itself was a thing of terrible beauty, a long, double-edged blade forged for a single purpose. Its polished steel reflected the gray morning sky, a sliver of cold light in the somber tableau. The swordsman was a professional, his demeanor impassive and detached. He had requested the queen's forgiveness, a customary formality which she granted. He was part of the ceremony, a necessary component in the state-sanctioned termination of a queen. The tension in the crowd heightened as he moved into position. His expertise was the source of both comfort and terror, while his skill promised a quick end. His very presence, and the gleaming tool of his trade, made the abstract threat of the sentence into a terrifyingly concrete reality. Anne, ever composed, prepared herself, asking her ladies to step away. She was aware of the man and his purpose, yet her focus remained inward, a queen facing the final protocol of her reign. The moment was suspended, poised between the last word of a prayer and the first whisper of steel. A silent negotiation between the victim and the instrument of the state. With her speech concluded, Anne Boleyn knelt on the straw-strewn scaffold, her posture erect and dignified. She removed her ermine mantle, handing it to one of her weeping ladies. Then, she untied her gable hood, revealing the neck that had been the subject of so much courtly poetry and ultimately political condemnation. Her final words were a quiet prayer, a murmur of "To Jesus Christ, I commend my soul." The swordsman, employing a calculated distraction, was said to have called for his sword, prompting Anne to turn her head slightly. In that swift, almost imperceptible moment, the act was done. There was no brutal chop of an axe, but a single fluid arc of steel, so quick that for a heartbeat, nothing seemed to have happened. It was a testament to the swordsman's chilling expertise. The silence that had held the crowd captive deepened into a profound, collective stillness. It was the silence of a shared, unbelievable event, the severing of a thread that had been woven into the very fabric of the kingdom. The air, once thick with anticipation, was now heavy with finality. A queen who had risen so high as to change the course of English religion and monarchy was gone in an instant. The laws of physics had been obeyed, but the sight was a defiance of the natural order of things. On the scaffold, a symbol of power and ambition had been reduced to a simple, tragic conclusion. The moment was not loud or chaotic. It was quiet, precise, and absolute. A profound hush fell over the Tower, over London, and over an entire chapter of history. In the vacuum of silence that followed the swift action, a new sound split the air. The distant, booming report of a single cannon, fired from the battlements of the Tower. This was no salute. It was a signal, a stark message winging its way across the Thames to a king who was waiting for the news. Henry VIII, reportedly out hunting, could now proceed with his day, and with his future. The sound confirmed that his second queen was no more, and the path was now clear for his third, Jane Seymour. The fall of Anne was more than a personal tragedy, it was a political earthquake. Her personal badge, the white falcon, a symbol of her soaring ambition and pride, had been brought to earth. For 3 years, that falcon had represented a New England, a break with Rome, and a queen who ruled her husband's heart. Now, it was a symbol of a failed dynasty and a vanquished faction. The Boleyn party, once the most powerful force at court, was shattered. Her brother and the other accused men were already gone. Her fall was absolute. On the scaffold, the ladies-in-waiting moved forward, their private grief now a public duty, to cover the queen's remains with a linen cloth. The crowd, released from its trance by the cannon's roar, began to disperse, their whispers carrying the story out into the city. The spectacle was over. The political machinations that had led to this moment had achieved their goal. A queen was removed, a new one was waiting, and the machinery of the Tudor state, ruthless and efficient, moved on without missing a beat. The White Falcon had landed for the last time. The legacy of Anne Boleyn's 1,000 days as queen would be defined by the seismic shifts her reign had irrevocably set in motion. On the cold, gray morning of May 19, 1536, as a somber mist clung to the ancient stone walls of the Tower of London, she walked with a composure that stunned the assembled witnesses. This was not a broken woman, but a queen who had mastered the treacherous art of courtly performance, even in her final, tragic act. Her dark gray damask gown was regal and subdued. Around her neck, her iconic gold B pendant served as a final, silent declaration of her identity, a defiant sparkle against the gloom. She ascended the scaffold on Tower Green not with fear, but with a steady, serene resolve. Her final address was a masterclass in political prudence and personal dignity. Critically, she offered no confession, an omission that would have legitimized Henry's actions and bastardized her beloved daughter, Elizabeth. Instead, she spoke calmly, praying for the king, whom she called a gentle and sovereign lord, a final, ambiguous compliment. She urged the crowd not to meddle in state matters or question the judgment of their rulers, a subtle acknowledgement of the forces that had engineered her destruction. She entrusted her soul to God, a poignant assertion of the reformed faith she had championed. The swordsman, an expert from Calais, ensuring a swift and clean end, was a strange mercy from the king who had once moved heaven and earth for her love. As she knelt, her ladies weeping, Anne remained the picture of unwavering dignity. Her influence would far outlast her brief, explosive reign. The path she had carved led not only to her own tragic conclusion, but to the future rise of her daughter, who would one day inherit the crown and define an entire glorious era. Her story became a cautionary tale, a potent symbol of ambition, love, and the brutal calculus of power in the Tudor court, its echoes resonating through the centuries.